In a single vile act, Officer Daniel Hargrove spat on a black man standing quietly outside the precinct, unaware that the stranger was Marcus Ellison, the newly appointed police chief whose arrival would turn the department upside down. Daniel Hargrove had been a cop for 12 years in the small city of Riverton, a place where the police department operated like a tight-knit club. At 35, he carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from knowing the system inside out. He knew the streets, the shortcuts, and the people who kept the city's pulse steady. On that humid July morning, he was finishing a patrol shift, his uniform slightly wrinkled from the long hours. He parked his cruiser outside the precinct, ready for a coffee and a chance to vent about the day's calls. As he stepped out, he noticed a black man standing near the precinct entrance, dressed in a sharp navy suit, his posture calm but commanding. The man was looking at his phone, seemingly unaware of the bustle around him. Hargrove's mood was already sour from a domestic call that had gone sideways earlier. He didn't recognize the man, and something about the stranger's polished appearance set him off. Maybe it was the suit too clean for Riverton's dusty streets, or the way the man stood there, unbothered like he owned the place. Without a second thought, Hargrove muttered a racial slur under his breath and spat on the ground near the man's polished shoes. The spit landed close, a deliberate act of disrespect. The man looked up from his phone, his eyes locking onto Hargrove's with a steady, unreadable gaze. Hargrove smirked, expecting the man to back off or react with anger. Instead, the man said nothing, his expression calm but piercing, and returned to his phone. Hargrove, feeling a mix of triumph and irritation, walked into the precinct without another word. Inside, the station was alive with the usual chaos. Phones ringing, officers shuffling reports, and the smell of burnt coffee lingering in the air. Hargrove headed to the break room, where a few of his buddies were already gathered. He recounted the incident outside, laughing as he described the man's lack of reaction. "Guy just stood there like he was too good to care," Hargrove said, leaning back in his chair. His colleagues chuckled, one of them, Officer Pete Malloy, shaking his head. "Probably some lawyer or something, thinking he's above us," Malloy said, sipping his coffee. The conversation shifted to complaints about overtime and the new department policies trickling down from the city council. Hargrove barely paid attention, his mind still on the man outside, wondering why he hadn't reacted. Meanwhile, the man Hargrove had disrespected was Marcus Ellison, 42, a veteran law enforcement officer with 20 years of experience. Ellison had spent his career climbing the ranks in a larger city 2 hours away, where he'd served as deputy chief for the last 5 years. Riverton City Council had recruited him to take over as police chief after the previous chief retired amid a string of controversies. Ellison was no stranger to tense situations. He'd faced worse than a disrespectful officer in his time, but Hargrove's act had caught him off guard. He hadn't expected his first moments in Riverton to be marked by such open hostility. Still, Ellison kept his composure, knowing his role required him to stay above petty confrontations. He finished reviewing an email from the mayor, pocketed his phone, and walked into the precinct. The desk sergeant, a veteran named Clara Thompson, greeted Ellison with a nod. She'd been briefed about the new chief's arrival and recognized him from the photo in his file. "Chief Ellison, welcome to Riverton," she said, her tone professional but warm. Ellison returned a small smile, thanking her as she handed him a temporary badge and directed him to the conference room where the department's leadership team was waiting. Word of the new chief's arrival hadn't yet spread to the rank-and-file officers, and Ellison preferred it that way. He wanted to observe the department's culture before making his presence known. In the conference room, Ellison met with Captain Linda Reyes, the department's second-in-command, and a few lieutenants. Reyes was a no-nonsense leader with 22 years on the force. She briefed Ellison on the department's challenges: understaffing, low morale, and a growing distrust from the community, particularly after a series of high-profile incidents involving excessive force. Ellison listened intently, asking pointed questions about training protocols and officer accountability. Reyes was impressed by his directness and the way he seemed to cut through bureaucratic jargon. "We've got some good officers," she said, "but there's a culture problem. Some folks think they're untouchable." Ellison nodded, his mind flashing back to the officer outside. He didn't mention the incident but filed it away, knowing it was a glimpse into the issues he'd been hired to address. Back in the break room, Hargrove and his colleagues were still trading complaints when Captain Reyes walked in. "Hargrove, Malloy, get to the conference room." "Now," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Hargrove raised an eyebrow, annoyed at the interruption, but followed Malloy down the hall. They assumed it was another briefing about budget cuts or new paperwork requirements. When they entered the conference room, Hargrove froze. The man from outside was standing at the head of the table, shaking hands with one of the lieutenants. Hargrove's stomach dropped as Reyes introduced him. "This is Chief Marcus Ellison starting today. He'll be leading the department moving forward." Hargrove's face flushed, his earlier smirk replaced by a mix of shock and dread. Malloy glanced at him, sensing something was off, but said nothing. Ellison's eyes met Hargrove's for a brief moment, and though his expression remained neutral, there was a weight to his gaze that made Hargrove shift uncomfortably. Ellison didn't mention the incident outside, instead addressing the group about his vision for the department: accountability, transparency, and rebuilding trust with the community. His voice was steady, authoritative, but there was an edge to it that suggested he wasn't here to play games. As the meeting continued, Hargrove's mind raced. He hadn't meant for things to escalate this far. It was just a moment of frustration, a bad habit born from years in a department where certain behaviors went unchecked. He tried to focus on Ellison's words, but all he could think about was the spit on the ground and the man, now his boss, standing at the front of the room. Hargrove wondered if Ellison would call him out, maybe even fire him on the spot. But Ellison didn't single him out, at least not yet. The meeting ended with assignments for the leadership team to review current policies and report back within the week. After the meeting, Hargrove lingered in the hallway, debating whether to approach Ellison. He wasn't one for apologies, but the reality of his situation was sinking in. Ellison was his boss now, and that moment outside could cost him his career. Before he could decide, Ellison walked out of the conference room, heading toward his new office. Hargrove hesitated, then followed, catching up to him in the hallway. "Chief Ellison," Hargrove said, his voice tighter than usual. Ellison stopped and turned, his expression unreadable. "I wanted to say welcome to Riverton," Hargrove continued, the words feeling hollow even to him. Ellison nodded slowly. "Hi." Hargrove nodded, unsure what to make of Ellison's response. He wanted to say more, to explain or apologize, but the words wouldn't come. Ellison turned and walked away, leaving Hargrove standing alone in the hallway. Over the next few days, Hargrove couldn't shake the feeling that Ellison was watching him. It wasn't overt, no pointed comments or direct confrontations, but Hargrove noticed Ellison's presence during roll calls, his quiet observations during briefings, and the way he seemed to take note of every officer's behavior. Ellison, meanwhile, was settling into his role. He spent his first week meeting with officers, reviewing case files, and talking to community leaders. He heard stories of mistrust, particularly from Riverton's Black and Latino communities, who felt the police were quick to escalate and slow to listen. Ellison knew that changing the department's culture wouldn't be easy, especially with officers like Hargrove who seemed to embody the old guard's worst habits. He hadn't forgotten the incident outside the precinct, but he was deliberate in his approach. Calling out Hargrove immediately might satisfy his anger, but it wouldn't address the deeper issues. Ellison wanted systemic change, and that meant understanding the department's dynamics before making moves. Hargrove's unease grew as the days passed. He heard whispers from other officers about Ellison's reputation as a hardliner who didn't tolerate misconduct. Some of his buddies, like Malloy, tried to reassure him. "He's new. He's gotta flex a little, show he's in charge," Malloy said one evening over beers at a local bar. But Hargrove wasn't so sure. He'd seen the way Ellison carried himself, the way he commanded respect without raising his voice. It was different from the bluster of the old chief, who'd been one of the boys. Ellison was an outsider, and that made him unpredictable. A week after Ellison's arrival, the department held a mandatory training session on de-escalation and bias awareness. Hargrove sat in the back, arms crossed, as a consultant walked the officers through scenarios involving race and use of force. The room was tense, with some officers rolling their eyes or muttering under their breath. Ellison was there, observing silently from the front. During a break, Hargrove overheard two officers joking about the training, calling it a waste of time. He didn't join in, but he didn't disagree either. When the session resumed, the consultant called on Hargrove to role-play a scenario. A black motorist pulled over for a broken taillight. Hargrove stumbled through it, his responses clipped and defensive. Ellison watched, his face giving nothing away. After the training, Ellison called Hargrove into his office. Hargrove's heart pounded as he sat across from the chief, who leaned back in his chair, studying him. "You've been here a long time, Officer Hargrove," Ellison said. "You know this department better than most." Hargrove nodded, unsure where this was going. "I need officers who can lead by example," Ellison continued. "The community's watching us, and they're not happy with what they see. You've got a choice. Be part of the problem or part of the solution." Hargrove swallowed hard, the weight of Ellison's words hitting him. He mumbled something about wanting to do better, but Ellison cut him off. "Words are cheap, officer. Show me." Over the next month, Ellison rolled out changes. He implemented stricter oversight on use of force incidents, required body cameras to be worn at all times, and started community outreach programs. Hargrove felt the pressure mounting. His colleagues grumbled about the new rules, but Hargrove kept his head down, trying to avoid Ellison's attention. He started second-guessing his instincts on calls, wondering if Ellison was reviewing his reports. The incident outside the precinct haunted him, a constant reminder of his mistake. One evening, Hargrove responded to a call about a disturbance at a local bar. A black man, visibly upset, was arguing with the bartender over a tab. The situation was heated but not violent. Hargrove's old instincts would have led him to escalate, to assert control with a raised voice or a hand on his holster. But this time he paused, remembering Ellison's words. He talked the man down, listening to his side of the story and defusing the situation without an arrest. When he filed his report, he noticed Ellison reviewing it the next day. Ellison didn't say anything, but he gave Hargrove a slight nod, the first sign of acknowledgement since their meeting. Ellison, for his part, was navigating his own challenges. The city council was pushing for quick results, while some officers resisted his reforms. He received anonymous complaints about his leadership, and a local news outlet ran a story questioning whether an outsider could handle Riverton's problems. Through it all, Ellison remained focused, meeting with community groups and working to rebuild trust. He also kept an eye on Hargrove, seeing potential in him despite the rocky start. Ellison believed in second chances, but only for those willing to earn them. Months passed, and the department began to shift. Some officers embraced the changes, while others left, unable to adapt. Hargrove wasn't sure where he fit. He hadn't apologized to Ellison for that first day, and the weight of it lingered. One afternoon, during a community event where officers handed out water and talked to residents, Hargrove found himself standing next to Ellison. The chief was chatting with a group of kids, his demeanor relaxed but authoritative. Hargrove took a deep breath and spoke up. "Chief, about that day when you first got here. I was out of line. I'm sorry." His voice was low, but the words were clear. Ellison looked at him, his expression steady. "I appreciate that, officer," he said. "Takes guts to own up. Now keep showing me you mean it." Hargrove nodded, a mix of relief and determination settling over him. He wasn't sure if he'd fully earned Ellison's trust, but he wanted to try. The department wasn't perfect, and neither was Hargrove, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. Ellison continued to lead, his reforms taking root. Riverton's streets didn't change overnight, but the community began to notice a difference. Officers listening more, de-escalating instead of confronting. Hargrove became one of the officers Ellison relied on, not because he was perfect, but because he was trying. The spit on the ground was never forgotten, but it became a turning point, a reminder of how far the department and Hargrove had come.